All right. Brian Horn asks, how do you find locations to photograph in a new area, and what kind of features do you look for, especially finding accessibility and things like that? Well, what do you do, Nick, when you're trying to find a landscape photography location to shoot? What's your general process? Let's say you're taking a trip to Acadia National Park. I don't think you've ever been there before.
No,
What
not
do you do
yet.
start to finish?
So it usually starts off in Google Earth. That, or I will look up 500px/maps. But usually it starts off in Google Earth, and I just start kind of looking at the photos. If you turn on the photos layer in Google Earth, a whole bunch of geotagged photos pop up, and you can just see what people are taking pictures of and exactly where they took pictures of it. Usually they're these really poor cell phone shots, and you can kind of get an idea for what a spot looks like. So it starts in Google Earth, and then once I've kind of narrowed down an area that looks cool, then I can bring up the photographer's ephemeris, and then I can see like what time the sun rises, when it's and where it's going to rise, where it's going to set. Same with the moon, and that kind of gives me a lay of the land, so I can kind of plan what time of day I would want to be there. But Jim, you've got something kind of new in the works. What do you got going on?
Yes, I think he was baiting me on this question.
Yes, I know.
I have spent like
Teeing it
every
up for you.
waking second of my life for the last couple months working on a new app for photography locations. And so look for that at the start of 2017. Well, my tentative release date is January 1st, 2017 for that. I've been talking about this project for a long time, but we're getting an app developer to get this thing done. I have on my computer a database of well over 1,000 locations to get us started with. Awesome. And then people will be able to submit their locations and advertise themselves as photographers if you want to, advertise that you can be a day guide in that in that area and things like that too. So it should be pretty cool, but not yet. But hopefully it's coming. This has been a big problem for landscape photographers for a long time, and hopefully this will get solved. But I do the same things as you, Nick, kind of finding areas. The other thing that I've been using a lot more lately is Instagram on areas because like when we were in Glacier National Park last week, it's not so much that you don't know what the location is, but you're not sure what the current conditions are at the location. Is the fall color good in this area of the park that may be a lot higher or lower in elevation, and you don't want to drive 2 hours to find out. And so kind of following Instagram, just, hashtag Glacier National Park or whatever, looking while you're there can sometimes really help. But generally, just like when I'm driving around in a car, what makes me, press on the brake and say, ooh, I want to shoot here, is very often photos that I have filed away in my head that I've seen before. Every photographer is building on the knowledge that other photographers have done, and you put your own spin on it. We're not trying to copy each other, but you're getting ideas from others. So, last week when I was driving through Glacier and there were these aspen trees on a nice flat spot with too much underbrush, it was like, press on the brake because, we've seen that shot before of, beautiful aspen trees like that. And so it helps you to recognize it. But the big thing that I'm looking for generally is the composition. You can find a gorgeous overlook just where about anywhere, just about every city has like the spot that's the beautiful overlook over the city. And it's just boring because there's no foreground there. So I'm often looking for something that I can put in the foregrounds. When I'm driving around and sunset is coming up, I'm looking for an interesting rock or water that could reflect the sunset, just something that's the foreground. It seems like that's the hardest thing to find, is a foreground and then a general nice shape for the background to make a composition. How about you, Nick? Just as you're driving around in a location, what makes you stop?
Well, usually, like you said, it's the composition. Like you can have several of the different elements, but unless they come together in a way, it's really hard to make a photograph.
Yep.
So like I'll use like a Google Earth or something to figure out where I'm going to go. But then I just use my eye at the time to determine where I'm going to stop and actually take a photo. I try really hard not to do too much comp stomping as far as like, seeing somebody else's work and then being too inspired by that. because that shot's kind of already been done. So I want to do something new. And I want to at least give myself the opportunity to be creative in some way. So I try not to look at too many good photos from a location before I go. I just want to know the general area where to go, show up, and then let my own creative side start dictating where I'm going to actually start setting up a tripod. And another thing that kind of helps for like determining like the time of season or whether the timing is right to going, like say you're planning a trip to go photograph wildflowers somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, you can go to there's all kinds of Facebook pages where people are, just posting little Facebook or little cell phone snaps of the current location. Like, you go to Pacific Northwest Photography and there's all kinds of little cell phone photos like, hey, I went here today, so click. And typically you can get a good idea for the current conditions on Facebook groups like that. So if you're going to, the Colorado area, you would do some kind of search for, the Rockies photographers or something like that. There's Facebook pages for almost every region. You just got to kind of scour it and see how stuff's looking at the time.
Yeah, that is a great resource. I have had a hard time finding locations in Idaho. And I looked on Instagram and people are using hashtags about Idaho, and I've found some really cool locations that I'm anxious to go shoot. So it's kind of the process that I'm using.
Cool.